Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and guests, welcome back to Day 2 of the Middle East Institute's Annual Conference 2021, entitled Meeting the Future Together, Opportunities and Challenges for the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East. Today's proceedings will revolve around the role of technology, but before we dive into today's theme, please allow me to recap yesterday's events. On day 1, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean delivered the opening address, highlighting that while Singapore has looked to the Middle East in order to safeguard and strengthen our supply chains, the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds have also invested in Singapore and Asia. On top of the opportunities presented by these inter-regional exchanges, SM Teo underscored that sharing experiences and best practices would allow countries to build domestic resilience on all fronts. The terms resilience and opportunities were echoed in the first keynote speech yesterday, given by Minister Tan See Leng, as he outlined the importance of keeping trade flows unimpeded by supporting critical infrastructure development, which in turn strengthens supply chain resilience. Singapore, as Minister Tan emphasized, is the ideal launchpad for Middle Eastern companies to access Southeast Asia, particularly in service areas such as e-commerce, health, and fintech. The two ministers provided vital talking points for yesterday's panel on trade, where economic diversification, security and trade linkages, people-to-people movement, and harnessing professional talent were among the discussion highlights. Yesterday's focus on trade sets the stage nicely for today's session. Today's panel is titled The Role of Technology, Building Resilience Through Smart Cities and Cybersecurity. Before the discussion begins, let us now watch the recorded keynote speech delivered by Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister in charge of the Smart Nation Initiative.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to join you for this year's Middle East Institute Annual Conference. Let me begin with a central proposition. COVID-19 has not changed history, but it has exposed the pre-existing defects and it has accelerated the ongoing technological, economic, social, and strategic tsunami sweeping across the world. Let me just briefly offer 4 points. First, the world last year demonstrated how digitalization can enable a more nimble and adaptive response to a crisis. As COVID-19 first emerged, our government engineers quickly developed tools to communicate accurate information to the public through websites like Mask Go Where, Support Go Where, Flu Go Where, and also messaging platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram. Some of these were developed quite literally overnight or within days, with our engineers working round the clock. The ability to provide crucial information from trusted sources made a pivotal difference for the necessary collective response. We also developed a digital contact tracing tool called Trace Together, which collects encrypted proximity data using Bluetooth signals. We know that contact tracing is usually a very manual and resource-intensive task, but it is absolutely critical in battling a pandemic. An efficient contact tracing system can break the chains of transmission by quickly identifying and isolating close contacts of infected persons. Trace Together has been able to shorten the average time required for contact tracing from 4 days to less than 1.5 days. Countries in the Middle East have also rolled out applications to address the COVID-19 challenge in your own sector. For instance, the UAE's Virtual Doctor for COVID-19 chatbot service. This is an app that helps users deduce if they are at risk of getting the virus. The Saudi Arabian government has launched a digital health passport in January on the mobile app Tawakkalna to indicate an individual's vaccination status. I think my friends in the UAE and Saudi Arabia will agree with me that these innovations have only been possible because of the steady investment in the digital foundation before the crisis hit. In terms of building the right digital infrastructure, developing modern capabilities, and most importantly, nurturing talent. Second, even as we battle the pandemic, leveraging digitalization can facilitate a more robust economic recovery post-pandemic. We must never waste a crisis. This is obvious in the potential of the digital economies in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East. ASEAN is expected to become the fourth largest economy in the world by 2030. Our region's digital economy is expected to grow sixfold, from about $31 billion in 2015 to almost $200 billion by 2025. In the Middle East and North Africa, the e-commerce market is expected to double in size to $48.6 billion by 2022. Both regions are also blessed with a high youth dividend, and we know that the young people are digital natives. They are not just digital consumers, but they will also be digital producers. They can drive progress in diverse fields like fintech, education, healthcare, logistics, as well as big data and artificial intelligence. And even as we take steps towards economic recovery from the pandemic, we need to intensify our efforts in an inclusive manner to equip all citizens with the right skills, the education, and the mindsets. And this is being done in several ways, including building digital literacy through education, enabling access to devices and services, especially for disadvantaged people or for people with disabilities, helping micro, small, and medium enterprises with access and expanding their market reach. In Singapore, we have the Smart Nation Initiative. Saudi Arabia has its National Transformation Plan 2020. And there are many others like the Smart Dubai and Qatar's Smart program. These strategies will enable us to emerge out of the crisis both stronger and smarter. Third, digitalization needs a safe, secure, and stable cyberspace. As we all go digital and we find ourselves increasingly dependent on ICT networks, we know that we will also be exposed to increased risks and vulnerabilities. Disinformation and conspiracy theories have spawned info pandemics in their own right. Malicious cyber activities will continue to be a clear and present danger, especially if there were a successful attack on critical information infrastructure. Increasingly, ICT infrastructure pervades almost all aspects of our lives, whether in managing smart grids, traffic, civil aviation, utilities, or even our personal devices. Last year, Singapore launched our Safer Cyberspace Master Plan, with the aim of going beyond protecting critical information infrastructure to providing some basic level of cybersecurity for the general public. This will ensure that all our citizens have basic awareness of the types of cyber risks and the sensible measures that we all need to take in order to better protect ourselves. I know Israel has pursued such efforts for quite some time. For instance, it teaches high schoolers encryption tactics and coding under its Vahim program. Fourth, at the international level, we need to establish common standards. There's a need to develop frameworks to promote digital trade across borders. And there is ongoing effort by a group of WTO members to update global trade rules in order to facilitate this digital trade. Singapore has pursued digital economy agreements with several partners to establish digital trade rules and digital economy collaborations. In the security sphere, there is a pressing need to build a multilateral rules-based order in cyberspace. Some good steps have been taken in this direction to build stronger regional and international frameworks to regulate cybersecurity. For example, the ASEAN digital ministers have agreed to establish an ASEAN Computer Emergency Response Team, CERT, the information exchange mechanism to foster stronger cooperation among national CERT. In the Middle East, Oman hosts the ITU Arab Regional Cybersecurity Center to strengthen regional capacity and to coordinate cybersecurity initiatives in the region. We can build further on this foundation and even explore inter-regional exchanges of information and best practices to harden our common defenses. We also need to continue dialogue at the UN to develop international rules and norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Some progress has already been made through the UN Group of Government Experts and the Open-Ended Working Group on Cybersecurity. Singapore will continue to support these efforts, including through the Group of Friends on the e-governance and cybersecurity and the Group of Friends on digital technologies. It is in our common interest to ensure that the full range of members' views are taken into account, reflecting the international community in all its diversity. My friends, our journey through the COVID-19 pandemic has not been all gloom. We have also seen unprecedented levels of international cooperation in the fight against the virus. For example, China shared the first genome sequences of COVID-19 through the Global Initiative on Sharing All Influenza Data, GIS-8, and they did so early on, and this in turn enabled many others, including Singapore, to quickly develop diagnostic test kits and to begin work on treatment and vaccines. As we look forward now towards reopening safely in the new year, Singapore has also published a digital health certificate utilizing blockchain technology. We call this Health Cert to facilitate cross-border verification of COVID-19 test results and vaccine records for international travelers. Several healthcare providers in the region have already adopted this standard, and we hope to work further with other partners to take this forward. Our journey through COVID-19 has shown that complex multi-stakeholder partnerships can produce significant results when we are united around a common goal. I believe we can build on this momentum to emerge stronger from the crisis towards a brighter digital future, because our common digital resilience depends on what each of us does and how well we work together. Thank you all, and I wish you a very successful conference.
On behalf of MEI and our audience, please allow me to sincerely thank Minister Balakrishnan for his address. His speech stressed the crucial role of information technology, notably the investment in a sound digital infrastructure, which is part of the development strategies adopted in both the Middle East and Asia. Yet, risk and vulnerabilities remain ever present in cyberspace, posing problems that require national and international solutions. Minister Balakrishnan has certainly provided key points for our speakers to ponder. Let me now turn to today's panel on technology, which will be moderated by Mr. David Koh, the Chief Executive at the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. Mr. Koh is also the Commissioner of Cybersecurity, holding the legal authority to investigate cyber threats in order to protect Singapore's essential services. Before I hand over to Mr. Koh, please allow me to remind our audience that during the Q&A segment, you may put forward your questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. Mr. Koh, the stage is yours. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, Assalamualaikum to our distinguished guests, esteemed participants from all over, and in particular our distinguished speakers on this panel, Professor Itzik Ben Israel, Dr. Gurusham Rai, and Dr. Steven Griffith. Thank you in particular to the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute for pulling together such an expert panel of distinguished speakers and inviting me to facilitate this discussion on such a timely and important topic. Across Asia and the Middle East, we are seeing the development of smart cities and digital infrastructure. These digital ambitions stem from the recognition of the competitive edge and increased productivity that digital systems and smart technologies can bring to our economies. Emerging technologies embedded with these smart cities are also set to improve our citizens' lives by making the delivery of public services more efficient and effective. However, the more digitalized and connected that we become, the more important it is for us to secure our systems if we really want to reap the economic progress and improve living standards that digitalization promises. As Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, the Minister in charge of Singapore's Smart Nation Initiative, has noted, COVID-19 has demonstrated how digitalization enabled us to be more nimble and adaptive in responding to crises, and how digitalization can facilitate a more robust economic recovery post-pandemic. COVID-19 accelerated the pace of digitalization, with businesses intensifying their adoption of digital tools for business continuity, as well as individuals amplifying their digital activities to work, live, and play. However, this increased reliance on the internet has also introduced new vulnerabilities, and it has expanded the attack surface area. As we tap on the economic opportunities brought about by digitalization, we must also double down on our efforts to deal with the risks today, to secure our digital space. Cybersecurity is one of the key components of securing our digital space. Just in the physical space, we would lock the doors of our house, protect our family and belongings within. Well, we similarly cannot leave the digital doors of our digital house open and let malicious cyber actors take whatever they wish. There would be real economic costs attached to this. Beyond the financial impact, cybersecurity underpins the trust of our digital dependent way of life. Let me elaborate on these two concerns. First, attacks on our digital systems have real economic costs. In IBM's Security 2020 Cost of a Data Breach report, the global average cost of a data breach in 2020 was estimated to be $3.86 million. In the Middle East, the average cost was estimated to be $6.5 million, placing it as the region with the second highest cost among 17 regions surveyed. The healthcare industry saw the highest average data breach cost in the Middle East. In ASEAN, the average cost of a data breach in 2020 was estimated to be $2.7 million, with the financial sector facing the costliest impact. In India, the average cost was estimated to be $2 million, with the industrial sector being the costliest industry. Second, and even worse than the highest monetary cost that one can imagine, is the need to secure trust. Trust among businesses and society for digital systems that they depend on for everyday activities. Businesses need to know that they can operate in a secure environment. Citizens need to know that the public services supporting their continued safety, health, and welfare remain accessible. There is a real risk that trust in the digital economy is eroding, with examples in major data breaches and consumer information mismanagement reducing the consumer's willingness to engage in online services. Trust between nations to behave responsibly in cyberspace has also taken a hit, exacerbated by events like the recent SolarWinds breach. It's a highly sophisticated supply chain attack. Cybersecurity is not an impediment to digital progress. Rather, it is a key enabler of our collective digital ambitions. Ultimately, cybersecurity fosters trust in the technologies that we use today. This trust is the invisible glue that holds our collective digital ambitions together. If we believe that our future prosperity and security will be dependent on the digital world, then we must recognize that we cannot continue treating cybersecurity merely as a technical issue. It is a risk management issue that extends beyond, across the geopolitical, security, economic, as well as the social domains. It must also be dealt with as a whole of nation manner alongside partnerships in the international community with the participation of non-state stakeholders like the private sector, academia, as well as other stakeholders to enable our future digital way of life. With this backdrop, I'd like to hand over the floor to our panel of distinguished speakers who will share their thoughts on the future trends in cybersecurity in the context of smart cities, the new technologies and talent needed to meet the increased appetite for digitalization in smart cities, and the security of information and big data that is inherent in the architecture of smart cities. Well, we have three distinguished speakers with us today. First, we have Professor Itzik Ben Israel. Professor Ben Israel is the head of the Security Studies Program and head of the Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Studies Center at the Tel Aviv University. I've known him for many years. He is also the chairman of Israeli Space Agency at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Space. In 2010, he was appointed by the Israel Prime Minister to lead a task force that submitted to the government a plan that made Israel the major player in cybersecurity that it is today. And in 2018, he was appointed again by the Prime Minister to lead the next revolution in Israel, secured artificial intelligence. A retired Major General in the Israeli Air Force, Professor Ben Israel, has served as head of the military R&D in the Israel Defense Forces and the Ministry of Defense. Second, we will hear from Dr. Steven Griffith. Dr. Griffith is the Senior Vice President of Research and Development and Professor of Practice at the Khalifa University of Science and Technology in the United Arab Emirates. At Khalifa University, UAE, he oversees the development and implementation of the university's research strategy and operations. In addition to his work in Khalifa University, Dr. Griffiths is a member of the UAE Artificial Intelligence Expert Group, a member of the Dubai Future Council on Energy, and governing board member of the Graphene Engineering Innovation Center at the University of Manchester, and a board member of Microsoft Energy Core. Dr. Griffiths holds a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT and an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Last but not least, we will hear from Dr. Gurusham Rai, Distinguished Fellow of the Observer Research Foundation and Chief Information Security Officer at the Prime Minister's Office of the Government of India. Dr. Rai has over 30 years of experience in information technology, including experience in the areas of e-governance, cybersecurity, cyber laws. Dr. Rai served as India's first National Cybersecurity Coordinator, where I worked closely with him, and was also previously the Director General of India's Computer Emergency Response Team. He has helped in the drafting of national policies on cyber laws and cybersecurity, and has represented India at official fora, bilateral discussions, negotiations in the area of cybersecurity and internet government. Let us now hear from Professor Itzik Ben Israel. Itzik, please.
Thank you very much, David, and also NUS for inviting me. I guess we know so many years that I could take your speech, copy it, use some AI deepfake technology, put my face and voice there, and give my lecture with my own voice, but your content. I agree with every word you said. And I'm especially glad to see here among the panelists, Dr. Griffith. It happened by accident, but you know, as the head of the Cyber Research Center of Tel Aviv University, first thing we did after we heard that Israel signed a peace agreement with UAE, we contacted Khalifa University and started personally. I met already through Zoom, of course, Dr. Griffith, trying to establish cyber relations, at least at the academy level, between the two universities, which tells you something about the centrality of cyber technology for building strong relations between countries in the Middle East, even countries that until very recently were enemies. And it also proves the point that you already mentioned, also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, we all know that computer technology is the dominant technology of the 20th century and 21st century, from the second half of the 20s. And it plays a huge role in economy, and it was mentioned by you too. But we also know that there is a catch here, because the more computerized we become, the more vulnerable we become, more opportunities we create for bad guys to not to act for the benefit of society, but for their own interest. And therefore, everything we talk today, even smart cities, which is the main theme here, from the beginning, we should think about securing it against those bad guys. And there are a lot of bad guys. And that's why I say, and this is perhaps my first message here, is that's why I said that actually cyber threat or cyber attack is the dark side of computer technology. And therefore, it should be addressed from the beginning. Second point, which also was mentioned by the minister, by its very nature, cybersecurity is interdisciplinary. In our research center, for example, at Tel Aviv University, we have 250 researchers. 2/3 of them come from the, I would say, natural disciplines like engineering, computer science, mathematics, etc. But 1/3 of them come from School of Law, business school, psychology, social science, etc., because of the very interdisciplinary nature of the cyber problems. It's true that usually we solve cyber problems by technology. Well, in the 21st century, we try to solve every problem by technology, but the problems themselves are never purely technological. I mean, unless you take into account the human psychology, social behavior, business considerations, legal problems, values like privacy, etc., you don't really understand the problem, and then you don't really know what solutions to look for. And this was very clear already in 2010 when I was called by our Prime Minister, as David mentioned. He asked me to take cybersecurity and raise the, make a plan for the government, how to be more prepared in the next 10 or 20 years against cyber attacks. And I already said to him, this is something we cannot do simply by looking, predicting at the threats and then looking at solutions and then try to design solutions from zero. Because the so complex nature of cybersecurity doesn't really enable us to do it. And actually, we have to deal with building a certain system that will know what to do when new threats will emerge, and new threats will emerge, and the time constant is very short. We all know about Moore's law. And the whole program that we prepared was about this, what we call ecosystem. Now, we were not the first, of course, Israel was not the first to use cyber technology. Already in 2010, there was some 30 years of experience all over the world, but we were the first to, in a way, to take it out of the closet, to make it a legitimate subject for a normal civilian occupations and in all fields of life, starting with open academic research, going to industry, education, etc. Now, the main theme of this conference is about smart cities, or this session is about smart cities. And smart, when we say smart, we usually mean somehow involved with computerization. I mean, computer make it smart. And when we say smart city, we mean a city that uses computer technology in this way or that way to make it more efficient, to analyze the data in such a way that will help society, etc., etc. And as I said, computers, AI, cybersecurity, AI, I mean artificial intelligence, all of these are really different aspects of the same technology. And therefore, my first advice here will be not to call it anymore smart city or smart nation in the case of Singapore, but to use a term that we use here today here in Israel and call it a city in the age of technology or something like this. Because when we say smart city, we usually tend to think about the smart part of it. We tend to forget it is a city. That is, people are living there, they are entertaining themselves, they should make living, and it relates to economy, to many things. And therefore, I would prefer the term city or nation in the age of technology. Now, everything which is connected to artificial intelligence, and as David mentioned, I was appointed 2 years ago by the Prime Minister to do the same, something similar to what I did 10 years ago for cybersecurity, to do it now for artificial intelligence. When we speak about AI, it's only strengthening my previous observations. Our dependence on computer technology will grow, and therefore, so will our vulnerability. We will be more vulnerable to attacks by bad guys, including simple criminals that would like to earn money in an easy way. Now, the main question is, what is the role of government here? I mean, what should the government do and what should be left to the free market forces to do? And the way I think, if in the last 2-3 minutes that I have to talk, the role of the government should be limited to, I would say, 2 main missions. One is providing the necessary conditions for the build-up of cybersecurity capabilities or computer technology capabilities or AI technology capabilities. And the second one is adding a level of cybersecurity layer, a national level. And I would say a few words about both of them. First, for the creating the necessary conditions for cybersecurity build-up of capabilities. This is not so simple as it sounds. It is, as I said before, it's not about technology alone. It's also about awareness. It's about education. It was mentioned here that by the ministers that in Israel we teach cybersecurity in high schools. We even teach simple, I wouldn't call it cybersecurity, but rules of behavior in elementary schools, not only in high schools. In high schools, we teach them coding, etc., and simple computer science. In elementary schools, we teach the kids only how to behave in this new world. I mean, what you should post in Facebook, what you shouldn't post in Facebook, etc. So education is very important part of it, and education usually is determined by education system is controlled by governments. Regulation, which I don't know if you will have more time later on, perhaps I would say a few words about this. These are all controlled by the government, and the government should find a way. At the end of the day, we have here 3 or 4 different communities, that is academia or education, let's say education system, including the academia, industry, government. Also, we have not to we have to bear in mind that when we say government, it includes also defense, because cybersecurity was born for 30 years. It was used by governments only for defense and intelligence services, etc., and was not known publicly. You have these 4 communities, and the main role of the government in creating the right conditions is to invent some mechanisms that will enable each one of these communities to earn something from helping the other ones. It's not enough to tell them to do it. They should feel that they get something. And the second role of the government is to add the national level of cybersecurity. This is very simple because unlike other threats, you cannot really defend yourself only by building walls around the asset you want to defend. Because cyber threats are coming through the networks. Most of the networks is not owned by the victim, by the target, and is not allowed to do something which he doesn't owe, and only the government can do it. And this is maybe the second role that only governments can do. I think I finished my first. But the time you allocated to me, David, and I hope I'll have enough time to elaborate on certain issues later on.
Thank you very much, Itzik. As always, I think a lot of food for thought there. I think some of the key ideas I heard was that cyber threats are the dark side of technology, and they are interdisciplinary in nature. And the idea, perhaps not to call it smart cities, but rather cities in the age of technology. I think that's something that is worth thinking about. And lastly, the idea of the role of government, creating the necessary conditions to build up the capabilities, as well as providing this additional layer of cybersecurity at the national level. So very, very interesting. Now I'd like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Steven Griffith, please. Steven.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate the invitation from NUS to be part of the panel today. And thank you for the kind introduction earlier. I'm going to spend about the next 10 minutes talking about an area that I work on quite a bit in my own research, also what we're doing in a broad sense at Khalifa University. Smart cities, I think, is a very important topic, as we'll talk about throughout the course of my presentation. And of course, the cybersecurity of smart cities. Professor Ben Israel had mentioned this growing collaboration between Israel and the UAE on this topic, and I'm very excited about it. I think it's one that's critical and one that we want to pursue very aggressively. Let me start, though, by reflecting on the idea of smart cities. And so what was just discussed in the prior panelist, Dr. Ben Israel's comments, was that smart city per se is not really what we're after. We're looking to build cities that are for people and allow them to be better enabled in what they do through technology. And so cities, they come in all sizes and shapes. The definitions are varied, but we know that these are the places where we have people carrying out the majority of our economic activity. Through that economic activity, we sometimes have challenges to the energy consumption, the waste generated, and these are the kind of things we have to deal with as sort of the downside of rather very positive developments that happen through urbanization. When we look at the concept of smart, again, I don't like to start off with smart. I like to start off with the idea of sustainable city. And so if you look at the emerging standards around smart cities, sustainable cities, what you see is smart city is actually underneath the broader topic of sustainable city, because a sustainable city is about trying to create better lives for people through the use of technology. And of course, when we use technology, we also want to use that technology not just to improve the lives of people, but to increase resilience. And that is really the topic of the discussion today. And I think the panel was organized perfectly to address the emerging way in which smart cities are put together for us looking into the future. We think about the notion of smart, and we're trying to serve people, as I just said, with smart technologies or technologies to enable a better way of life. What has allowed us to start thinking about smart? Well, if you look at the evolution of smart cities and the announcements of smart cities, really the past decade, we've seen this grow up quite substantially. By about 2015, we probably hit peak smart city discussion. And what's allowed that entire discussion to take off so rapidly is the evolution of technology. So there are three things that I think are technological things that allows a smart city to really be successful. One is you've got to be able to collect data. So the proliferation of advanced sensors makes smart city obviously very viable, because you can begin to sense information about people, the locations where they are, and the various objects even the people are. And now with low latency, increasingly low latency and high speed, to either a storage repository or directly for analytics. And analytics today are largely deriving or orienting toward artificial intelligence. So machine learning, artificial intelligence, a paradigm we're going to see going forward in the future, which has really allowed this notion of smart to make its way so prominently into the vocabulary of people around the world. I think it's great, but there will be different issues we have to deal with when we get into the nuances of being smart and how we make sure that smart is robust. And I'll talk a little bit about that throughout the course of the presentation. Before getting into the security aspects, though, let's dive a little deeper into what a smart city can do when done well, and where smart cities are happening prominently around the world. So I'll talk about in the next couple slides some of the technologies and where I see trends in smart cities. In general, though, any of these technologies I talk about, the intention is to address key KPIs of what allows a city to make the lives of people better. If you look at various consultancy reports, there are many of them. I'd say broadly speaking, in almost every dimension you can measure, there's expected to be a 10 to 30% improvement in the KPI by using technology. I think that's reasonable. It's something that's achievable when the technologies are implemented well. Where smart cities are growing up prominently are in the regions of the world where we have the technological capacity, the human capacity to develop and implement well in cities these technologies. As you see here on the diagram, one of many reports again about smart cities. Abu Dhabi and Dubai and the UAE are leading in smart cities along with Tel Aviv, so it makes a natural connection to have Israel and the UAE on this panel. And of course, Singapore, I've always been very impressed with. I've dealt with Singapore now for multiple years at Khalifa University. We've set up multiple research collaborations, one of which was around microelectronics with the Institute for Microelectronics, which is, of course, is the core of smart technology. And so I think Singapore, as far as smart cities goes and cybersecurity, is top notch. So the collective on this panel is a representation of the types of countries and the cities in these countries where smart technology will serve people. We get a little deeper into what these different areas of technology deployment are. You can see a few categorizations here. The way I've always positioned the smart city technologies, you have energy, water, and waste, sort of one cluster I always look at. Mobility is unto its own, a huge area of opportunity for smart technology. Healthcare, a little less discussed very often, but nonetheless important. Then all the different realms of government. It can be e-services, it can be housing, it can be the security, and I think not the least of which is security, because civil security is one of the hot topics today. Where I see the trends happening the most is in the smart grid, the energy space, to create clean energy and connect that to intelligent buildings is obviously a major initiative in many locations. Additionally, there's quite a bit of work happening around mobility. Mobility is something that I'll talk about further, has been challenged by the recent COVID-19 pandemic, and nonetheless has got opportunities for improvement. And then government services. And I don't think many days pass if we don't see something in the news about the issues that may arise around biometrics. And so civil security is a very important area. Now, what's been less discussed, I'd say in recent years, but has become very prominent recently, is health. It's an area that I'm very interested in. And if you look at what the stimulation is around new technology in health, and we heard in the opening speech about some of the great innovations happening there, is COVID-19. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, which emerged last year, Health was important, but not our #1 priority. Now we're seeing the need to really look after healthcare technologies in a more meaningful way. And so I think that's an opportunity for innovation. Now, I mentioned I myself do work on the smart cities and smart homes technologies. And so I'll go through a couple slides about what we've been looking at in the areas in which there's been some emergence of important health applications, as well as applications in other sectors. First, in the broad sense, we look at smart cities after COVID-19. Great opportunity for innovation we've got now because so much has happened to move the things we do online. And the reason for that is that COVID-19, in order to avoid the transmission of the disease, there's been quite a bit of social distancing involved, people not doing what they used to do together, doing that now virtually as we're doing with this meeting. And secondly, a very high awareness of cleanliness. Where people were first worried about touch on the surfaces, then they got more worried, and appropriately so, about airborne transmission. And so in all ways, the environment around us, how clean that is, how infection-free it is, and also trying to avoid too much human contact now until we have broad vaccination. So through that, we see online shopping and robotic delivery. It's been happening prominently in many places. The contactless payment, digital, many places now. I never used Apple Pay, to be honest, until after COVID-19. I don't think I've taken out a credit card since the pandemic. I mean, everything now is a phone. You click a button and you swipe across a reader and you pay. So these types of technologies are just growing more and more. Remote work, I'm actually working from home today because we're still doing a small workforce on campus. That many of us now are doing that until we again get the pandemic well under control. Remote learning, likewise, learning and education has been affected. Online entertainment, many people now they have home gyms, less transmission of the disease if you're working out at home. So we see a lot of opportunity there. Robotic care, I'll mention some things we've done at Khalif about trying to help the patient care in hospitals with robotics. And then telemedicine. I'm getting very excited about telemedicine because I think the whole medical community and the entire healthcare system will be upgraded as a result of the pandemic. There's some things we can clean up and also do things now remotely. And finally, mobility. With mobility, we know the public transportation's taken a big hit, but that doesn't mean that it's the demise of public transportation. It means an evolution. How can we make transportation better in cities? So that's another opportunity that we can see. Now, recently I've done work on, as I said, smart cities, smart homes, and how that relates to the pandemic. The middle diagram is from some recent work we've done. We looked at all of the technologies in smart homes and smart cities, which were evolving anyway, and then all of the ways in which those technologies are being leveraged for healthcare, which is the lighter blue circles. I'm not going to go into all of them, but what I will use is a few cases and examples from what we've done at Khalif University to exemplify what can be done now that we're looking at innovation around health because of COVID-19. One is a COVID symptom detector we called COVID Sense. This was a technology created as part of a research program developed for COVID-19. And so the technology is, you give it to someone who is either gone in because is worried about getting COVID-19 or has it, and you monitor that person's vital signs and signals, and even give them a questionnaire over time and see if there's a potential progression of the disease that has to be more closely looked at by a doctor. And so it's one of the smart technologies that allow us to predict the onset of COVID-19 and also to predict the progression of the severity of the disease if someone has it. Secondly is the contact tracing. We didn't develop the UA's contact tracing tool, but at the university, we developed a certified testing center. We do all the PCR analytics, and then we relate and those results to the government, and then they post those results on your cell phone. So if you're green, you're good. If you're red, you're not. You have to be quarantining, and hopefully we're contributing to allowing that type of information to propagate. And I think it's been one of the key tools the UAE has used in order to help stop or at least somewhat curtail or mitigate the spread of the pandemic. And then finally, robotic technology goes without saying, it's critically important. We've built a self-sterilizing robotic system to be used locally. Many countries are doing that. I think it's nice to do this locally. It's one of these indigenously developed technologies to allow us to work with the doctors, work with the hospital works to be deployed, know their context, and help them build something that's going to be relevant to exactly the type of work that they need to be done with robotic system as they do this patient care. Now, this was all very good. These are the good sides. And Professor Ben Israel was talking about cybersecurity, and there is a downside. If you look across the world, the acceleration of digital adoption has been phenomenal, years ahead of where it was ever expected previously, which is good in some cases, but it also opens up many more attack surfaces for cyber attacks. And so this becomes a concern of us. And I look at just the cartoons. We talk about the data explosion. We won't even get into the number of zettabytes of data going to be transmitted or stored around the world within the coming years. It's enormous and it's growing every day. With that comes a cost. And even this year alone, we were talking about earlier on, David was mentioning the costs of cyber attacks or cyber breaches to individual countries. On a global level this year, it's the numbers is going to be exceeding $6 trillion by some projections for all the cyber incursions that are had throughout different countries of the world. And the number is expected to grow, nearly doubling in coming years. So cybersecurity, as we evolve with this evolution of technology and smart cities, is something I think that we have to focus on. And so that's why, as a context for this event and what we've been discussing, it's just urgently important. Now, how are we going to evolve the workforce to deal with cybersecurity and deal with smart cities in general? The way I look at it is I have some other roles in which I do look at human capital development, not the least of which is my role at Columbia University. And so if you look at the World Economic Forum projections of where the future of work is going, which is a whole nother line of discussion, very interesting. The government sector in particular has two areas that I highlight where the need is urgent for manpower development, but the supply is in short supply. There's not enough supply. And one is in digital. We talked about it. So it was moved from this paradigm of everything being done with in-person interactions to the cloud and having data stored digitally and then utilizing those data over a period of time. The government is in need of having more people trained in digital. Secondarily is encryption and cybersecurity. So now the government services or sector or the government in general sees the need for people that not just know about digital technology, they need to know how to secure it. And as you can see from the charts here, the inability to attract these specialized talents, the skills gap is critically important to the government sector globally. This is not any particular country, it's global. And so it's an area that we need to address. So given that, the public sector, which is the sector which looks after our smart cities, is in such need of these capabilities, and we know the potential value. My concluding or closing couple slides focus on what we can do as a collaboration internationally to develop the types of technological capabilities, innovation capabilities, and human capital capabilities that allow us to progress positively. So human capital goes without doubt. I just said this is an area that needs development. Without the people, you can't progress the technology. Now, when you need to progress the technology, R&D is foundational. And here I think the opportunity to develop new tools for smart cities, broadly for applications and also in cybersecurity, is an opportunity that we don't want to miss, because the technological platforms are emerging. Today we have IoT, Internet of Things, we have artificial intelligence. Coming down the pike in the future, we're going to have quantum technologies. I won't get into all the details of our research strategy in Abu Dhabi, but our Advanced Technology Research Council has quantum is one of the areas it's covering as a deep focus, in addition to all the cyber security related domains, autonomous systems and the like. So we got to look out those future technologies and make sure that we're developing the research capacity to address growing needs. And then finally, innovation. R&D is not innovation. R&D creates a platform for innovation, the translation of technology to commercial value. And so I think as partnership, looking at these areas in smart cities, which are important, we could find opportunities for collaboration. So how do you pick your collaborators? I would say the way to consider this is to look at the opportunities for working with like-minded organizations globally that are able to see the same value in similar activities. And so on the charts, just on the right-hand side of the slides here, what you see is the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, their innovation rankings. Quite prominently in this chart are all the countries that are represented by the panel today. So we have Israel, we have the UAE, Singapore, and India as well. Very, very high achieving in innovation, which is a key input to trying to do something of value together. And secondarily, it's not just about innovating around the technologies, it's about trying to make them secure. And again, if you look at the cybersecurity commitment that ITU has put out 2 years ago, they'll be updating soon, every country represented by the panel on the panel today is again one of the countries identified as having a high commitment to cybersecurity. So with that said, I think we have an opportunity to work together to build collaboration around human capital, R&D, and innovation. The UAE, Israel, as we've talked about previously, are already looking at this collaboration opportunity. Singapore and smart cities, I don't know of anywhere else in the world that is leading so much in that topic, so they can bring a huge amount of skill and capability and knowledge to what we do. And then, of course, other partners, and I'd say, we'll hear next from our colleague from India. It's a great opportunity to collaborate. And so we should bring in all these countries with the same thought on what needs to be done going in the future. And that future, hopefully someday, will not have COVID-19. But today, that's been a positive, so to speak, catalyst for doing things maybe a little differently, maybe a little better. And so let's see if we can make that happen. So with that, I conclude, and I'll look forward to the discussion that will come a little bit later. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Steven Griffiths. That's an excellent presentation. A different dimension of smart cities, looking at it from the sustainable perspective. I found that very refreshing and interesting. Better lives enabled through technology. And of course, the new technology that enables it, sensors providing the data, and then AI, ML providing the analysis, and then ultimately humans drawing the insights. It raises some questions on how we deal with this. And then ultimately, of course, with the goal of raising the quality of life. I thought that was very interesting in terms of where we saw this going. And of course, quickly circling back to the dark side of the aspects as well. The data explosion, the increased attack surface for cyber attacks. And I thought a very interesting point about human capital development. Firstly, I think a shortage of trained personnel, which I think you covered, but also I think perhaps raising the question of digital inclusion, whether there's a danger that some people will be left behind, or for that matter, low income countries, whether they are disadvantaged in this new realm. One of the questions raised in the Q&A, I think will come on this. And then ending off on a high note in innovation. So I think, thank you very much, Stephen, for that coverage. Now we'll come to our third speaker, Dr. Gurusham Rai. He's from India, distinguished fellow from the Observer Foundation. And I think he'll be talking to us a little bit about big data and the challenges of that, or at least the opportunities for that in smart cities. Dr. Gurusham Rai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ko. I express my gratitude to the Middle East Institute for inviting me and to share the dais with such honorable and reputed people, and more than that, meeting Mr. Ko after some time there. It's really a pleasure to be sharing the dais there. Friends, we have heard about the inaugural part lecture of the Honorable Minister and the two speakers there. Today, the world economy, GDP of the entire world is somewhere around $80 million. This was 2018. Certain countries dominate, and all of us we know. But more important aspect is that the about 20 to 25% on an average, the GDP is accounted by the digital technology. That's become important, and this percentage is slowly increasing it. India has a target of a $1 trillion digital technology by 2025 and a total GDP of $5 trillion. But if you look at the importance of the region, the Middle East as well as the entire Indo-Pacific region, about 65% of the population of the globe is accounted by these two regions. 62% of the world GDP is accounted by these two regions. 59% of the social media accounts are accounted by these regions here, and 70% of the world internet users are accounted by these regions. This factor is really very, very important. And 62% of the mobile phones are accounted by these. So the entire world economy, the importance of these two regions is very, very pointing out that we need to consider that. How the world is going to be tomorrow. In 2003, the number of devices which were connected were much smaller than the total population of the planet. What are we going to see in 2020? We expect about 50 billion. And by 2025, we expect 60 billion devices there. Now, this slide has a certain meaning there. Number one, the devices will be all kind of IoT sensors, all mobile phone, laptops, all heterogeneous devices. There will not be anything which will be not be connected on the network. The strategic value of such a large devices which will come up, the data will be generated. One can really wonder on the velocity, veracity, the speed, volume of the data will be generated. Now it will offer a strategic value to the countries, both for their surveillance purpose, both for their planning purposes, good and bad purposes there. At the same time, it becomes a gold mine for the perpetrators or the adversaries to exploit it. I mean, it is well known fact that the IT is a altogether different sector than many other sector. There are three basic characteristics of the cyber technology. One, there is no warranty guarantee. You buy the items as it is where basis. The data is monetized there. That is what the issue is there. Data is monetized. So when so much data is going to be generated, look at the different models will generate apart from the adversaries. Different model will generate, and we are seeing what is going to come up. We have seen recently the incidents or the news which are coming up from the Europe or from Australia, one of the Asia Pacific country, how the social media, how the data has become an important aspect there. I agree with Professor Bain, I won't call it future cities. I would say this is a future urban living, or maybe the word urban may not be correct, it's the future living there, where everything will be get connected there. Hospitals on one side, the road roller on the road on the second side, your academic, universities, military, civilian system, everything will get connected there. And this connectivity will become very, very prominent when we move in a total 5G kind of era. Today we are in a non-standard kind of architecture of the 5G, and in a matter of 1 year we are going to move the standard kind of architecture. The whole thing is going to be very, very complex in a matter of 1 year there. How much data will be generated? That is a mind-boggling kind of exercise there. How much? What will be the issues which arise? That becomes very, very important. And the smart city, this is a scenario which we are going to see the smart cities there. Now, we are not going to deal with one technology. We are going to deal with convergence of technologies. And the previous speaker, Steve, has mentioned there, we'll be dealing with all kind of a technology, whether it is artificial intelligence or whether it's a big data or the Internet of Things or the blockchain or the cyber security, virtual reality. Everything will have a convergence of technologies there. So it has a good aspect, it has a bad aspect, and we can see the good aspect first and then see bad aspect there. What it will lead to the growth of the economy in the overall GDP, it opens the opportunity to our younger generation, but it has an issue on the capability creation also there. But this is going to be the component of the digital transformation in what time we to come. We have already reached that time, but it's a matter of 1 year or 2 years. These are the components. In fact, many of these components are a reality today. Morning, evening, we touch many of the aspects there. Data analytics is a part of the thing. Robotic process automation is a part of the thing, whether you go to the stock exchanges or you go to the insurance sector or to any other sector, robotic process automation is a part of the thing. That is transformation we are going to see. We are going to see another transformation when we go for a future kind of urban living. At one point of a time, let me talk about 1980. Maximum data was with the government there, and the minimum data was the industry and businesses there. But in 21st century, the data is this whole pyramid is going to be reversed there. The minimum data will be with the government, and the maximum data will be with the private sector industry. That calls for Professor Ben and the Steve and the honorable ministers think the mutual cooperation between the industry. We will not be able to take lightly the industry and businesses, because everything is going to be connected world where the information lies and where we get a treasure there. So entire thing, we are going to see the global economy plus cyberspace. We're going to see the global economy cyberspace. That's a scenario which we are looking at it, in which smart cities or the urban living or whatever is a very much part of it there. Now, when we have so much devices connected, if we take example of the urban living or smart cities, as I said, we are not going to deal with one convergence, one technology. We are going to deal with convergence of technologies. Billions of devices will be interacting together. The billions of devices will be a kind of a heterogeneous devices. The data will be exchanged. It will going to create an issue there. Which data is coming up from which device? Which data is coming from within the country? Which data is coming from outside the country? Which data is coming from which region? This is going to be there. And whenever there is a large amount of a data, software, the typical IoT sensors or IoT devices will be much, much smaller than the normal laptop or the mobile phone. The issues are going to be different. They will not have that kind of a security. So the issues of the data exchange will give rise to the issue of cyber security. The protection of the information which is contained in those small devices, with hardly any firewalls or kind of a system there, is going to be a very, very important. And what we have seen in the past, how the cybersecurity scenario is moving from a to a more grimmer kind of a issue there. Recently, we have seen the solar wind case in one of the countries in the world. It was going on for last couple of years, and how it impacted the administration of that particular country is all well known today. Similarly, there are many incidents which we can quote for India, which can quote for Middle East, which can quote for IPR or any other European country. But what is important today is that the cases are no longer a simpler cases of a I mean, you're injecting, you're spoiling the website, they are defacing the website. Today we have moved from a disruptive to destructive kind of attacks there. That is the scenario which we have moved in, because with the improvement of technology, tools have become better, and this tools gives the capability, much better capability than we have seen in the past. That's one aspect. The devices are changing so fast. The security is becoming a serious issue, in that there is no software which is secure there. Many of the legacy system are happening, and we have seen in the case of a WannaCry or a PegaCry how a European company called a Merck was brought to a grinding halt world over. The company accounts for more than 28% of the container shipping business. That's very clear. In India also, one of the terminal came to a grinding halt, and in fact, all their activities came to a grinding halt. I've seen the attacks in the banking sector in India. I've seen elsewhere also. So we have moved from the direction of the cyber threat is becoming more and more grim and more challenging, and will become very, very complex when we have that smart cities kind of environment, or a connected 60 billion devices by 2025. It will be all cascading effect will be there. One system down, it will have impact on many other aspects there. And I certainly would like to quote a case in 2016 in the California, where 1/3 of the internet in the California was shut down because of a small IoT devices there. Friends, if you permit me for this slide, and this might purely my status there. If I look at the IPR and if I look at the Middle East region there, I find that where we have to move, if we have to move in this scenario of smart city or where the connected world, this is the desired state we have to move. But my assessment is that by and large, we are at a position where we have to move a lot. Some of the countries are doing better. Some of the organizations, some of the countries in the IPR and MEA are doing better than what the average value is there. Of course, India may be slightly lower than that, what the pointer current status shows. But this is the scenario for which we need to get ready ourselves. In the next, and the time, there is not much time. The next 2 years, we have to move this position there. Problems are rising, and we need to be very well. Now, what are the important issues which have emerged? I take the clue from the Honorable Minister. The issues are going to be privacy. Now, in a kind of a urban living smart city kind of issues there, privacy will have a different meaning. Today we have a GDPR. India is having its own kind of a data protection. We have a CBPR region in which Singapore is a part of it. Australia is a part of it. Americans are writing their own privacy, but are they interoperable? They are not interoperable. We look at the kind of regulation which are coming up and the kind of a technology, there is a complete mismatch there. We need to today it has become, the whole privacy issue has become one of the component of the geopolitical issues which are there. Cyber security, I have discussed, all of you realize what kind of a issues we are going to face cyber security there. We have a non-state actor which are promoted and which are used in front end by the state actor. There only recently, on a few cases, some of the state admitted the attacks which were there. But I mean, look at the solar winds. No one has so far admitted that this is the attack someone has got, but certainly it's the act of the state actor there. The other issue which the Honorable Minister mentioned is the international law. These norms of behavior we are talking about since 2001. But till today, in 2020, we are not even sure what we have not even reached a bit ahead. We are still debating, we are talking about it. The whole issue of cyber security in this scenario which is emerging is going to be much more complex and much more serious than what we had in nuclear issue. We took a lot of time to solve we come into the treaties and arrangement, the nuclear, but imagine the whole cyber is going to be very, very complex. There are issues of UN Charter, Article 25, Article 2, where the self-defense issues are there. There are issues of Budapest Convention, how the things are being blocked. The Europeans are saying until you sign the GDPR, until you become a part of the Cyber Convention, many of the things you will not get it. That's a part of geopolitics, but then this is a reality. Then the jurisdiction challenge to the data, because of the Budapest Convention, because of the other issue, there is a sharing of data has become important. And now, because of the privacy and the international issue, there's another issue of a reason, that is the localization of the data. Of course, India is also trying the idea of localization there because the data is not available. Then the other issue which has become, which we have discussed, is technology, data residing across the border. The technology issue, this is not the regulation, but the technology issue, standards. And we have seen in the case of a 5G, how the entire standards were hijacked by one of the country. As a result, we are finding a lot of monopoly kind of a thing. And the 5G standards have still not been finalized. Clouds, there's the clouds which are operating from one corner. We don't know where the clouds are operating, but the setting of the cloud is a issue there. The last important technology issue is the encryption. Today, 90% of the traffic moving on the web is encrypted. Of course, it gives me a better privacy, may or may not be security, but a better privacy, but it poses a challenges to how to detect the hackers there, how our agencies, the law enforcement agencies or the intelligence agencies, how they're able to protect the data, or even the cybersecurity professionals search there, how do they handle the thing? This becomes a challenge there. And I agree with Professor Bain that point of a time that we need to have it today. There is a need for a more international regulation in all these things rather than a simple cyber norm. Then the next issue which has become is the right in the cyber diplomacy. As I said, right to self-defense. If someone attacks like a solar wind, shall that country attacks that particular country when after you detect? The origin of attacks has become a problem. You take a DDoS attack originating from one part of the world to another part of the world, it passes through many countries there. And while it passes through many countries, today we are talking about a terabit of a denial of service attacks there. It passes through, it clocks, it jams many of the networks there. Now, should all the countries come to the attack? A cloud is hosting the applications of multiple countries there. If one application gets compromised, it may compromise many other. Cascading effect may happen. Should the countries attack the one country? These are the issues. These are all become a cyber diplomacy issue, and we have seen how complex. I quoted a cyber international norm there. And the last is the internet governance. We took a couple of years to come to understanding that we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. But as Professor Ben mentioned there, in a multi-stakeholder approach, it's the government which has to implement the regulation rules and guidelines there. The private sector has to participate in a more vibrant manner there. But what is the responsibility of private sector that we need to define in a multi-stakeholder approach, particularly when we have the Steve talk about it, the capacity development. Today, when the technology is moving so fast, we require appropriate skilled people to handle incidents. We require appropriate skilled people to handle the technology, install the technology. We require people to argue our cases in the courts, legal. That is a different kind. That's what the manpower technical capability is required in the country. And that is where the private sector has to come forward and work with the government to do that. But this is a challenge there. The entire capability resides in some of the countries, some of the area, and this is really posing a problem. And one of the problem is the handling the cyber security scenario. And if the security scenario impacts one country, certainly the way the cascading effect happens, it may impact others. So these are the issues which we are going to see in the time to come. And then I come back on the Bain or my earlier speaker. To summarize my talk, the technology is driving every domain. It may be a small part of a power plant, but it drives the efficiency. It drives the efficiency or productivity of the financial system is a part of the ecosystem. As I said, 20-25% is accounted that. Technology and data have become serious and important geopolitical issue. Nobody wants to share the data. How do I address my cybersecurity challenges? And I have dealt with the CERT. I've interacted with many CERTs in the world there. The sharing of data is a challenge. It's not being faced by India, but almost everywhere. The number of gaps exist in cyber domain in the Middle East area and the Indo-Pacific region related to the policies, infra, and other aspects related to technology, which we need all have to cooperate and do that, because I said weaker part of the one region or the weakening of the one region will impact rest of the world. One need to have a comprehensive policies and uniform capabilities in technology to bridge digital divide with respect to the usage, development, and research and development. I completely agree and echo the sentiments of Dr. Steve when he talked about the research and development there. The developing a technology is a very, very expensive that we are going on. How many today we are going at the malicious activity right at the operating system level. But who is developing the operating system? One or two countries doing that. Developing the tool to monitor those operating system malicious activity is a challenge, and that's why the cost in the R&D is going on. Should we not think to have cyber policies which are consistent, interoperable, and oriented toward peaceful and constructive to address the emerging challenge, rather than moving in a different direction and bringing the geopolitics in the issues there? Friends, we are really going to be, as I said, in a much more complex scenario than the nuclear, where the technology, where the know-how was only with a few countries. Today, this know-how, cyber issues are across the country, across the world. As I said, 20-25% our economy will be driven by the cyber, will be accounted by the cyber. We are in a really challenging situation there. And the Middle East, as well the IPR, region holds a key. It's a major issue. If you are able to bring some sort of cooperation in this region among all of us, I think we'll be able to create a more balanced position. We'll able to drive the rest of the thing, that cooperation in the rest of the world. I once again thank Middle East Institute and Dr. David Ko and the panelists for giving me opportunity to present my views. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gurusham. As always, all right, thank you very much for your insightful comments. I thought that was great, covering the explosion of devices far exceeding the world's population, data being monetized. And then I particularly like the analogy of the inverted pyramid, where government now really used to have all the data, but increasingly now we'll be at the short end of the stick. And also the idea that there is a convergence of many kinds of technology, and all of this having good elements as well as bad elements. And the good, of course, leading us to a brighter future, especially in economic aspects. But the bad elements then escalating from nuisance, fraud, crime to potentially disruption and ultimately to destruction. I also like the idea of internet governance and cyber diplomacy, the role of government and recognizing that this is a multi-stakeholder domain, and ending off that this is clearly not just technical, but increasingly geopolitical. Thank you very much, Dr. Gurusham Rai, for those comments. Right, we've heard from three very distinguished speakers. I managed to pull some up. So before I continue, I just would like to invite everyone, please, to put in your Q&A questions. There is a chat for Q&A, and I will go through some of them. We've already got three. I'll be coming to them in a while. But before I go there, I'd just like to say that listening to the three distinguished speakers, I got some common themes. The first one being that there's a great opportunity in this domain. Really, it can be translated into sustainable cities where you get better healthcare, government services, etc., leading ultimately to better quality of life. Second, that there is a whole human dimension to this. And the speakers talked about quality of life, sustainability, or cities in the age of technology, or the future urban living. So clearly recognizing that it's not just about technology, but how it interacts with the human dimension. The third common theme I heard from our three speakers was really about data. How it is an enabler. The sensors, technology has provided the sensors which enable us to collect the data. These devices are growing at a phenomenal rate, and the data is monetized. It is also analyzed and insights are drawn. And this idea of the inverted pyramid, I think it raises questions for me with respect to privacy in this world of where there's so much data. And secondly, when you talk about the analysis, AI, ML, etc., then the ethics of AI and ML associated to it. The fourth theme that I heard that was common was that all of this also has a dark side. I think all our speakers repeatedly went to the point that the technology offers great opportunities, but also has a dark side. So you have the cyber attack surface increasing, and the challenges of dealing with disruptive and disruption and destructive attacks. Also, I thought the question of the human capital gap was excellent, raised by Steven. And I'd like to push this, in my mind, one step further, whether this would raise a question of digital exclusion, the haves and have-not being left out, not just within countries and also between countries. And the last, fifth element I heard recurring among our three speakers was that this issue is clearly not just merely a technical issue, but it's an interdisciplinary issue, it's a human issue, and there is a geopolitical aspect to it. So I think five common themes which I picked out. I'm sure I'm not this is not comprehensive, but just some ideas which I would like to start off with. I have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I would be going to that. I'll encourage all our participants to type in any questions that you have, and I will come to them as best as I can. So the first question is from Ong Pao Shen, and he asks, how vulnerable are national grids and dams to cyber attacks in the region? What preventative measures are effective? I would like to direct this question to Professor Itzik Ben Israel as well as Dr. Gurusham Rai. I think both of you are experts in cybersecurity. So the question is, how vulnerable are national grids and dams to cyber attacks? Itzik, perhaps you can start off first.
Okay. Well, to be very short, they are very vulnerable. And the reason is very simple, because we use computers not only for communication, networking, etc. We also use computers for controlling some heavy infrastructures, like dams, like power grid, etc. In the old time, we used human control. I mean, it was done manually. People were shutting something, going by foot, shutting something, opening something, etc. Today, it's all done by computers, and therefore, wherever there is a computer, you can use the same technology, cyber technology, in order to hack into it and do something, not for stealing the information, changing the storage of information, etc., but for changing the control algorithm and then causing a huge damage. And that's why critical infrastructure, cybersecurity of critical infrastructure is one of the most important issues that should be taken care of. And as I said before, it's not enough for the infrastructure themselves to defend themselves. They need also some help from a national level layer. Now, the good news, maybe if it is a comfort, I don't know if it's a comfort, is that the more advanced you are, then on one side, the more vulnerable you are, because the more advanced you are, it means that the rate of infrastructure controlled by computers is higher in your country. But then you have more knowledge and technology how to counter it. I mean, nothing goes for nothing in nature, as you know. But still, the answer is yes, we are very vulnerable. And in Israel, for example, many years before we, as I told you, went out of the closet and opened it to every normal civilian intervention. Many years before that, we already, from the beginning of 2001, we already had established a unit in Israeli government, which was put in charge of cyber protection of critical infrastructure, power production, water supply, transportation, etc. For this reason, I don't know who asked the question but for that reason.
Thanks so much, Itzik. Dr. Gurusham, please.
Thank you very much. I will take it. I will only extend my answer to what Professor Ben has said. Nothing in this world is 100% secure. Nothing in this world is 100% secure. But if you look at the technological direction which is happening there, we are moving towards a virtualization. With the 5G kind of a scenario coming up, or let me say next generation communication, we are a totally virtualized world where the entire device or the equipment or the system is controlled by the software. Wherever there is a software, there are issues and we cannot simply take it that it can be secure any point of a time. We may secure today, but not tomorrow, because the nature of the technology is like this. So it makes us to stand always on the feet. But what scenario which comes to me, which is the area of Professor Ben, AI algorithms there. You are implementing AI algorithm, and we still have to figure out how the algorithm need to be tested with respect to its integrity and the function. That's a big challenge for us to do that. The second challenge is that the same algorithm is being used with a certain modification by the adversary is there. You change the entire configuration, the adversary configuration, AI algorithm is checking it. So it keeps on a check and balance, the cat and a mouse kind of a scenario which we have seen in physical world. It's a challenge, and we need to stand up always on the feet there. If any point of the time someone sees that it is 100% secure, no. But then there is it is not such a bad kind of a scenario that we should completely leave. The technology plays, let us say, 20% of the role in terms of the protection of securing the devices, securing any system or any configuration. 50 to 55% role is played by the processes there. If we are able to implement process regularly and by the skilled people, I think we can certainly enhance the resiliency of the system. That's why in the area of cybersecurity, we talk about resiliency, how much resiliency your system has. We don't talk about how secure is your system there. I never asked secure there. So the process and the people, they are far more important in the entire sector of securing it. And this is what I think I would recommend, that we need to look at it and we need to be vigilant about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great answers from both our panelists. Let me now move on to another question I have in the Q&A. This is from Ambassador Chan Heng-chi. Thanks very much for the question, Heng-chi. Her question is, do low-income countries, are they disadvantaged in practicing cybersecurity? How do they deal with technology obsolescence? Now, I'd like to expand the question to the human capital dimension and invite Steve to deal with this. So let me repeat the question. Are low-income countries disadvantaged in practicing cybersecurity? I'd like to expand it in terms of the human capital, both for cybersecurity as well as for AI and all the supporting technologies that smart cities need. How do we deal with the challenge of human capital as well as technology obsolescence? And I would like to invite, after Steve has given a stab at this, I'd like to invite Itzik and Gurusham as well, if they have comments as well. So Steve, please.
Very good question. It's a very big question, but let me try to answer that. I'll start on the human capital side. So I think wherever you are, whether it's a developing country, it's a developed country, we're all facing the same issues, that the future is very different from the past. So as we look at the development of human capital, the world is becoming much more digitalized. Some countries are advantaged because the digital technologies are in place and we have experience with those. Others, and I'll talk about this shortly, the digital technology is not available. And so that will come to the technological point. On the human capital, no matter where you are, I would say there's a progression between a starting point and end point of how you have to bring a student through education and take that student into the ability to work in a productively, whether it's going to be in smart city technology or cybersecurity. So today, as you look forward, and I was showing this World Economic Forum report of the future of work, what we need to train students to do, given the rapid dynamics of technological change and the technologies we're seeing, we need all the students to become well-versed in the fundamentals of math, statistics, and programming. I think if you don't understand those dimensions, you don't understand cybersecurity, you don't understand smart technology, so it's fundamental. Secondly, we don't know what these technologies are going to look like. So a year from now, we may have a whole new set of technologies which we have to deal with, and so the ability to think analytically, the ability to think critically is just as important as knowing the technologies that we have today. And the third, and maybe it's the most important given my own personal experience, is understanding systems. So at one time, being a systems engineer was a luxury. You know, we built maybe a enterprise software system and we had to know how the components fit together. Today, everything is a system. I mean, all the interesting challenges I see are systems level. So if you have the ability to think critically, analytically, you know digital through programming basics, you know math, and you know how to think about systems, you have a good fundamental. Then you start to figure out the path toward being productive in something like the government sector, the public sector. And so there I say, as you get to higher education, some students should become more proficient and expert in thinking about computational system and analytics, not the least of which is machine learning, AI, modern technologies, which of course would be applied to cybersecurity. We know Professor Ben Israel knows very well, and some of the things we've talked about through my team at Khalifa is how you apply AI to cybersecurity. And so it's not cybersecurity per se, it's getting to the point where you apply your knowledge to that topic. The second area for cities, let's say not everyone has to be a machine learning expert, is something I would call city science. So you take your systems engineering knowledge. If you don't want to become a data scientist, you don't want to become an AI expert, you have to know how the city operates. I got into energy, water, waste, transportation, government, health, how that system functions and how you put it together properly with people in the middle of that system is a skill in its own right. So you have these people that will understand the city, other people that understand the fundamental technology, and then you bring them together and you have them work together collaboratively. Personally at Khalifa, what we like to do is build institutes and centers, multidisciplinary, multiple types of backgrounds. Everyone has the same core knowledge, which is essential to be able to move toward an application like cybersecurity, but they're not all specialists. An AI person might work with someone who understands urban planning. They come together, they think about an application area, and they build something interesting and allow us to have innovation. So I'd say if you progress in a certain trajectory, no matter what country you're in, you do the best you can with your infrastructure, you can get your human capital to a certain point of evolution, which is productive. On the technology side, it's tricky because you think about Singapore and Dubai, extraordinary infrastructure. It's magnificent, right? I mean, we have everything that we need. We have all the technologies. Just today, Dubai Airport announced that we have biometric face recognition, no more requirement for your travel documents as you go through the airport. You just walk through. This is how we do it here. You go to some places we work with you, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. It's a very different story. And so I think the way to view digital and to view cybersecurity in these areas and the technologies and obsolescence is the same way we've looked about, say, sustainability. We've known that we got to move all the countries of the world to be able to adopt clean technology, and not all the countries have the financing to adopt the technology or the knowledge. So you have multi-governmental, intergovernmental organizations looking after how to create lending, for instance, at low cost to be able to build the technology, bring the expertise to upgrade the human skills. In a parallel to smart city or cybersecurity, you have to be able to bring the financing to build the backbone. You have to have the sensing networks, you have to have the infrastructure for communication, you have to have the analytical networks, you have to have the experts come in for a period of time to upgrade the human capital that exists. And so I'd say we got to take the same framework to enable to build out in all countries of the world a very resilient set of cities and cyber-secure set of smart cities. And it'll take time in some places, but I think the trajectory needs to be similar to what we see in other domains. We start at a point where maybe there's low capability and try to get to something better over a period of time.
Thanks so much. That's a great coverage. I'd like to invite Itzik. Any thoughts on this? How will small countries, especially low-income countries, deal with these challenges?
Well, philosophically, when I think about low-income countries and digital knowledge, let's say, okay, digital capabilities, I don't know what element is the hen here and what element is the egg. It's a hen and egg issue. I mean, are they low-income countries because they are not playing a right role in modern technology, or the other way around? But leave it alone. I agree that this is a key issue, and the key solution is talent. But although I agree with every word that Steve just said, it's not only university level. It's not only knowledge. I mean, this can be solved quite easily by importing foreign talent. Okay, if you need only few experts to help you. The real issue is not this. If you want to change the income, you want to change the share of the technological component on your economy and your capabilities, etc., you have to start from a very young age. It's as I told you, we went some 10 years ago, one level down to the high school and then to elementary school. And then in certain countries, Israel is one, Singapore, by the way, is another one. Between high school and university, we have another school, which we call compulsory service or national service. It's a kind of a school, okay? You have to in all levels, you have to build the right mechanisms and the right in schools, it's the right type. I mean, it's not enough to say we will teach digital technology or cyber technology, etc. It's different from one level to another level. I mean, you cannot teach, for example, in high school in Israel, when we teach students what we call cybersecurity, 1/3 of the hours is devoted to ethics, the right behavior. I mean, I'll give you now a tool. I have to teach you, you are a kid already. I mean, in high school, you are still a kid. I have to teach you how to use or how not to use this tool.
Thanks so much, Itzik. Gurusham, any thoughts on?
I think no. For the low-income group, see today the whole thing need to be looked at in a different perspective. There, we have a formal education where there are issues where the low-income countries are there. Even a country like India has an issue there, but we need to look at a capability development in the formal and the informal method there. When I say formal, I mean to say degrees, which are a set process there. But informal is we need to start some practitioner-oriented kind of a training. And the companies must keep a budget, maybe 6 weeks different course modules, depending upon the nature of the training required, right from 1 day to 6 weeks, 4 weeks, or 3 months, or 1 year kind of a training. Those kind of a informal, or let us say non-formal kind of a method, we need the low-income companies will have to do that. Because the people who are working, they may not require a detailed, deep knowledge, but today, if we are able to operate and run the operation in a kind of a watchful manner or in a conscious manner, I think that will help us to do the process. As I said, if we teach them the processes, what they have to follow, the consequence of not following a process we need to follow, and I think we'll be doing a good job in enhancing the resilience of the system. So, the low-income countries, I mean, maybe India also included there, we need to follow a non-formal method more predominantly than the formal method.
Thank you. Right, I've got another question here from Tilak Doshi. And the question is for all our speakers. Oops, I've lost a question. Let me try to, here we are. The question is that when you think of what do you think of the power of these very large tech companies? And he has named Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. I would add the likes of TikTok, where the management has the power of silencing certain people or groups and the power of deciding what is and what is not to be shared on social media. So, very topical question. I'd like to ask Steve, would you like to start off? Then we'll go to Itzik and then Gurusham.
I'll take that one. It is a good question. I mean, it's in the news, not the least of which is on our minds because of the situations in Australia, right, with the Facebook. So we know that at least the Australians are thinking about this question. So I think the question comes down to a classical one about what happens when you have monopolies. So today, if we think about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the different technologies behind smart cities, it's really about scale. You know, the more data you have, the more information you have, the better you can develop tools. The better those tools are, the more people want to use them. So you have a select group of companies which are able to, because of their business, build some very robust systems. And I'd say, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, the like, and they're becoming quite dominant, and they're really dictating the rules of the game. You have also a global situation. So it's not like we can do anti-regulation within one country like the US, right? So trying to make sure we don't have monopolization of industries. So I think this comes back to my prior point about international cooperation, having a shared like-minded view amongst governments globally of what needs to be done in order to progress topics like smart cities or anything around the progression of technology in the digital space. If we want to not have to be wholly reliant on the likes of the tech companies, which are now holding the cards, because they're the ones that have the technology in many cases, you need to have a voice, right? And so if you're a very, very small country, and as you said, you don't have the human capital necessarily, you don't have the technology, you necessarily will have to be relying on these companies, and they'll dictate the rules of the game because they're the ones that are able to provide you with what you need. So I think the more there can be an international consensus on what needs to be done as we move ahead digitally, the better we'll be able to deal with the industry, which is now dominant. In some countries, China, for instance, I mean, obviously it's large enough economies so that there's a whole different set of rules and it's within the borders. In many cases, those companies have a different way of working with the government. But I'd say the companies that we mentioned, the Microsofts and what have you, I'm on the Microsoft Energy course. I'm not saying Microsoft is bad, but they are becoming very dominant. In the energy industry, we say all the time now when we meet, we talk about the fact that you need to buy the tools of the company that is developing them most robustly, and that's becoming the tech giants.
Thanks so much. Running out of time, we've got lots of other questions. Itzik, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I try to be very short, and perhaps my answer here will surprise you a little bit. I think it's a kind of a very fashionable question, asking about the power that Facebook, etc., have. This phenomenon is known for some 250 years now, since the Industrial Revolution. Today, because information becomes a very dominant component of our life, we look at those companies that are in charge of developing and processing information. But you can ask the same question for other products as well. For example, we all have defense forces. UAE, Steve, Singapore and Israel, we all need fighter aircraft. And we all use the same aircraft, F-16, produced by one country, and there are no more than 2 or 3 other alternatives. That's all. And you can ask yourself, I mean, what power? This is a very old question, and usually we will deal with it. Now, people just found that the same question that was asked about monopols and global monopols before are now also relevant also for those monopols of information. I don't think it's unbearable or unbreakable problem like it was in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a refreshing perspective, Itzik. Gurusham.
Dr. David, I have a little different view than what Professor Ben has mentioned. If you look at the tech companies, the tech companies are, in terms of economy, much bigger than many of these countries in the world. They are really calling a shot there. It's going to be a very, very challenging time to come. These companies are challenging their own government also. If you look at China, how the Alibaba and the Chinese angle, it came up, and the antitrust modification law came up. It's not going to be as simple as that, and it's going to be a very, very challenging situation there. The world is also moving to a different polar position there. Each country, as I said, is moving toward the localization kind of thing because of the attitude of the tech company. The Australian had to go a very far away to toe down or to bring down the tech giants in the world, in their country. It's going to be very, very complex scenario there. I don't think I have an answer. And today, after participating international meeting at so many places, I don't think the governments in the world also themselves, if they come alone together, they will find a solution. They are not in a position to come to an agreement because of the background driven by tech giants. They are driving the national economy. They're driving the elections there. So it's going to be very, very difficult, both from the strategic angle, political angle, or any other geopolitical angle. I think going to be very, very challenging. How it will unfold, I cannot say. I cannot imagine how the thing is going to come up. It's not as simple as Ben has come out with.
Thank you very much, Gurusham, for the honesty. I don't think Itzik was saying it's simple. I think he's just saying that it's not a fundamentally new problem. But very good. Great questions, great answers. I've got another question from Weng Cheong. as governments come, it's similar to, it's a build-up of the previous one, as governments come to the terms with the fact that they don't own all the data, how is this going to shape future relationships between governments and tech companies? So it's a continuation of the previous discussion in some respects, but from the perspective of data. So, well, Gurusham, you brought up the example of the inverted pyramid. How do you think we're going to deal with the data? And how do governments and tech companies' relationship going to evolve?
So, I mean, as I said, relationship between the government and the companies is a very, very complex. How it will take a turn, I really cannot say. But see, I will give a different aspects of the perspective of the problem there. Now, in some part of the world, including in India, we are talking about the sovereignty of the data. Okay? Now, I really don't know what is the sovereignty concept applies to the data when it comes to the sovereignty of the state. I really don't know. We are trying to solve the virtual problem in a real scenario there. That is where the challenge is there. Each one of us are each of the countries trying to localize the data. Whether the largest, I mean, if you take the AI, Steve said about the AI. Now look at the AI. Who are the countries who are in a position to meet the basic kind of a scenario for developing the AI algorithm? One is USA, huge data, huge demand, and the algorithm capability is there. Next is China, whose data, large population, large data, and then the capability, algorithm capabilities and demand is the consumption is also there. And the third country is India. The same key factors are available, the three countries there. But will the three countries come to a common? No. One of all three countries are playing their own geopolitics, led by the Americans there. In fact, they may not declare the localization, but all the tech giants are based there. Is not that localization of the data, that I have my own data, my country data. If I want to get the data as the laws of the country, I don't get it. I have to sign the lateral treaty. I have to give so many certificates. Again, I have to depend on the mercy of that particular country judicial system to get it. So it's not a simple. It's a very, very complex. If the government complication and the private companies coming things there, it is going one to me. The direction appears to me. The countries are going to get more and more inward looking, maybe slowly, but that is a direction I look like it.
Thanks so much. Maybe I ask Steve for your perspectives on this before I move to the next question. What do you think is the relationship of government and big companies with respect to data, especially this whole idea of sovereignty of data, especially when we're trying to reap the benefits from the economic dimension? Steve, please.
It's a great question. Honestly, I have a paper now coming out, which is very much related to this issue about data. It's on smart homes, smart cities, and the policy frameworks implemented globally around that. You know, I think what we looked at when we studied the topic was, in particular, the EU GDPR. If you're looking at tech companies and where you have the ability to intervene when you think there is a risk that the data from your population or whatever might be jeopardized by their access to it, you need to have a voice in how you want those companies to behave. And the companies have to care because you're at a scale which allows you to be meaningful to them, right? So a small individual country without having any real business of a company, the company's not going to listen. You take the European Union and you start to say, look, you have to behave in a certain way and you have to give people the right to be forgotten and so on and so forth. When they when you have access to their data, they will comply because they need the business. So I think in places where you have very robust policy and you have scale, you have some leverage to ensure that you can put your frameworks forward and the companies will listen. As I was saying earlier, though, there are countries which do not have scale. They have very fragmented policy framework. And so in that case, you need to think about how you can build this international consensus on what you want to be the way in which the data are governed, and then approach as a collective these companies, and then they'll have more of a concern for how they'll behave with regard to your policy. And we have a nice map in our paper about all the data protection policies of the world and what have you. It's very fragmented, but the places where I think you're going to find the best opportunity today are those places where there's solid understanding of what they want and they have scale. And otherwise, To be honest, if the cloud that Microsoft or Amazon or any of them have holds your data, you don't have much to say about it unless you have an ability to tell them this is your policy. And if you don't behave well within the context of our policy, you're not going to do business and you're not going to operate with our citizens.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, we are fast running out of time. There are two questions I want to get to quickly before we wrap up. One is from Travis Tan. He asked, will the rise in tech diplomacy drastically alter the way that countries interact with each other, especially the way that large countries interact with smaller countries? So I'll ask Itzik, member of a small country, and Gurusham, member of a large country, to weigh in on this. And then I have a final question, which is from Ambassador Qasim Boale from Bahrain, who has said, I saw the slides, a robot near a hospital bed. I would think that when we are sick, we want emotions more than machines. And I'll ask Steve and Itzik to weigh in on that. So the first question, tech diplomacy, Itzik and Gurusham, please, quickly, before we wrap up.
I guess it was not a question about the way people talk with each other. I mean, like we do now with Zoom. It's a question of using technology in order to influence the use of technology held by big countries or powerful countries in order to influence small and weaker countries. This, of course, is happening. This is one element which we call soft power, added to the hard power usually meant by military actions and attack, etc. Again, it's an old phenomenon. It was not born today. It's 250 years or even older in this case. I mentioned everyone that already in the Middle Ages, certain countries use technology for commerce, for influencing, and at the end of the day, intervening in the business of other countries. And technology is now the next things that we use. I don't think it will change the nature of the things. I must say something which will be, it is very general, but I think it's going, it's surfacing around us, above us all the time. It's usually we use technology to overcome forces of nature, and we usually tend to forget that one of the strongest force of nature is human nature. We don't include it in the list of Newton's law, etc. But it was already said before Newton, some 450 years ago, by Francis Bacon, that knowledge is power. And knowledge has 1,000 faces. Today, knowledge is perhaps, the face of knowledge today is this ICT technologies and computer technologies and the AI, etc., etc. But this is something we have to bear in mind. It will not change the real nature of human beings. People will always wouldn't voluntarily give you the information, not only because of privacy. In certain countries privacy is taken not as seriously as in other countries, but because of human nature. I mean, knowledge is power in a way. Thank you.
I will just add one word to what Professor Bain said. Today, there is a information is power, then the knowledge is power. The next line, you drive the knowledge only through information. In the artificial world, you drive the knowledge through the information world. And this is the scenario. Many of us, we used to have the knowledge by virtue of our original thinking. Today, our thinking will get shaped by virtue of the information, by aid of the tools, which some of them Professor like Ben will produce the thing. So information is going to be power. How I'm going to analyze information is going to be power. So tech and data is going to play a very, very big role. It appears, I don't want to look like a pessimistic, but my feeling is hunch is that it may create a further wedge between and the digital divide between the haves and have-nots, because of the availability of information is going to be monopolized, and where the entire focus of the politics worldwide is there. We have seen in the COVID-19 cases also there, and we can see many other cases also.
Thanks so much. Steve, what do you make of the robot at the bedside?
That's a great question. So that question, let me just say, the context in which I'll give my answer is that there's this whole debate about the future of work. Will robots replace people? And my answer is always absolutely not, at least not from what I can see. Robots, they don't have empathy. They're not able to critically think about the well-being of people. They don't have emotion yet, although some argue they're going to get it someday. So I'd say always, at least from what I can project, there will be a need to have the human component on all those intangibles that humans have that robots don't. And that human will have to be working with the robot collaboratively to make these kind of things like medical care happen well. Now, today, what could happen is the robot can have a screen on it, and you can always have someone interacting to be safe, of course, from transmission disease, so that they can interact with the patient in the hospital room. Still, I think that's where I get back to innovation. Through a screen, like with what we're doing now, I can't really get a sense of all the body language. So I don't really get a sense of what you're thinking the way I would know is if I were sitting right across from you. I can't really get a sense of anything with touch because it's not available. So if we get into a world where there is more social distancing, because I hope it doesn't happen, but the COVID-19 keeps on causing us a problem, or something else happens, another pandemic, I hope that doesn't happen either, we will have to innovate to bring the human dimension back into these electronic systems, which we're now using so heavily. So by no means do I ever project that the future is going to be all about robots and AI. I mean, I think that would be a mistake. But if the circumstances present themselves such that we have to deal with certain cases where that happens, we have to be innovative about how we bring back the human dimension. I think that's a critical piece of innovation happening today.
Dr. Ko, if you permit me, I'll give a very funny aspect of the entire thing.
Okay.
I am on page with Steve that the robots are not going to replace the human being, but robots are going to dilute and to a large extent replace the original thinking and the innovativeness of a human being. That's what I have to say, that they are going to play a very, very influential role in the society in time to come.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think these are all the questions that we have time for. I'm going to invite our three panelists just to have 30 seconds lightning round for you to have some parting thoughts to all the participants. But before we go there, let me just sum up some of the thoughts that I took away. And first one was that the threats are not just about information, losing your data, but they are moving on to disruption and potentially destructive acts. Second is the challenge for low-income countries as well as low-income people within our countries. For the countries, it will be the need for expertise, financing, and perhaps even capacity building, both for technology as well as cybersecurity. And then for people within our countries, the low income, I think there's a challenge for being left behind, the issue of the rich and poor divide. Is there a digital divide as well? And how do we then bring about digital inclusion? The relationship between big tech companies and governments. Clearly, no simple answers here. Clearly, it's something that it's here for us to see. Questions about how we deal with the data, who makes decisions, and even governance. So not so simple. Then the fourth takeaway that I have is that, well, the emotive dimension. Robots, are they here to replace us? Maybe not. We still are humans and we want that human component. And then the last thought that I have is really that perhaps while the technology is new, we've seen some of this before already. So perhaps history doesn't repeat itself, but there are echoes or it rhymes. So firstly, about monopolies. Second, that there are no changing human nature itself. So great comments, questions, and answers from the panelists. I'd like to invite our three panelists to close us off with 30 seconds of parting thoughts. Gurusham, would you start off, please?
No, thank you very much. We have created, the human being have created the digital technology. Now it is a time to come to learn from the digital technology, how the technological devices are connected together, how they interface together, how to exchange the information in an integrated manner. That is what the need of the time the human being has to understand. And if you follow that technology, a common protocol, common interface, proper configuration, I think we'll be playing a very constructive role to address many of the issues, emerging issues, because of the technology. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gurusham Rai. Now, age before beauty. Itzik, can I invite you perhaps share some thoughts, parting thoughts for all of us?
In 30 seconds. Okay, I'll try. I think we covered more or less the trends that we expect in digital technology. But we have to remember that nature is not digital. Nature really is quantum, and there are no bits in nature. There are qubits, quantum bits. We just now started developing the technology for this, and this will change the game entirely. If we speak about trends in, let's say, 10, 20 years from now, not the next 2-3 years, then we will face entirely different problems, including, and here I beg to differ on my other two panelists, including the question of difference between a human being and a machine.
Thank you so much, Itzik. And Steve, I give you the final word for us this evening.
Fantastic. So I'll make 3 points. I think we covered it well. A smart city is not all about technology, it's about the people. So let's talk about sustainable cities with people at the center. Let's get the future generations of students trained to be appropriately knowledgeable in technology, but also know about what I call city science. How does the system of the city work with people in the middle? And finally, collaboration. I think the group here, amazing knowledge. And so the more we can bring together likes of the UAE, Singapore, Israel, India, look at these common problems, the more innovation we'll have and the better off we'll be.
Thanks so much. And thank you particularly for ending off on a high note that collaboration, we do have to work together. I think not just in the digital domain, but for the future sustainable cities, smart cities, cities in the new age of technology. And I think the nature of digital is that it is truly borderless. So it behooves us to work together. And I think I want to thank our three panelists on behalf of everybody for the wonderful session that we've had. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think ended off very differently from where we originally started. And on that note, I'd like to invite our host, Clement, to come in. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Middle East Institute, warmest thanks to our moderator, Mr. Koh, and to the panelists for giving us such a robust discussion. Also to our audience, thank you for contributing to the panel with your questions. We would now like to invite all our speakers and Mr. Koh for a photo session. So please have your videos turned on, look at your device cameras, and we are ready for the screenshot. Thank you very much. We will now conclude Day 2's proceedings. Please do note that tomorrow will be the third and final session for MEI's annual conference, addressing the role of education and human capital development. Human capital development, of course, was mentioned time and again by our panelists today. So if you have yet to sign up for tomorrow's session, please register via the link found in the Zoom chat box function. Also, an additional shout out to our audience that we do have an ongoing film festival, which will run till the 3rd of March. The festival will feature 6 films to be showcased via an online platform named the Shaw Kino Lounge. On top of these films, there will be an exclusive Q&A sessions with the directors of these films. To sign up, please refer to a second link in the Zoom chat box or simply visit the event section on the MEI webpage. All the two links will remain accessible in the chat box for the next 5 minutes after the conclusion of today's session. Once again, on behalf of MEI, a big thank you to our speakers and audience for today. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.